What if everything you've been told about love, worth, and being a real man is a lie? Seneca didn't whisper comfort, he roared truth. The man who walks alone doesn't lose love, he finds power. Be very careful with what you've been taught to believe about yourself, because somewhere between the sitcoms, the sermons, and the soft threats of romantic propaganda, you were fed a lie so insidious it disguised itself as truth. You were told that you're only half a man until you find your other half. That without her, whoever she is, you are broken, aimless, unworthy of real respect, and so you spend years, sometimes decades, not building yourself, but searching for someone else to complete the job. But what if I told you that everything in that equation was backwards? That the man who needs someone to complete him is the one who is truly incomplete. That dependence, not singleness, is the real deficiency. And that Seneca, the stoic giant who walked among emperors, would have scoffed at the modern myth of the better half. You see, you weren't born lacking, you were taught to feel that way. From the earliest age, subtle hands began carving out pieces of your self-worth and offering to return them only through the validation of a romantic partner. They told you love would heal you, that partnership would define you, that the apex of male evolution was not self-mastery, not impact, not vision, but being chosen. By her, as if your destiny could be validated by someone else's gaze, as if wholeness could be borrowed through intimacy. But Seneca knew better. He wrote, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary, and what is more unnecessary than suffering from the idea that you are unworthy alone." They never told you that singleness could be a sanctuary, that being unentangled doesn't make you broken, it makes you dangerous, because now nothing stands between you and your own becoming, no distractions disguised as devotion, no compromises masked as companionship, just you, your thoughts, your work, and the truth. Seneca didn't preach isolation for its own sake. He revered it as a forge, a place where the man, stripped of noise and niceties, could finally meet himself, not the performance, not the polite version, but the real, unedited self. And in that confrontation, he could finally begin to rule. That's what they never wanted you to realize, that your singleness is not a gap to be filled. It is an edge to be sharpened. Society taught you to fear that edge. They called it loneliness. But what they actually feared was your liberation. Because a man who doesn't orbit another's need, a man who does not seek his reflection in someone else's eyes, that man is untethered, unbribable. He cannot be manipulated by approval or softened by guilt or distracted by flattery. He belongs to himself, and in a world that profits from your confusion, your neediness, your endless romantic chasing, that is a radical threat. Seneca wrote that he is most powerful who has himself in his own power. Read that again. Not the one who is adored, not the one who is needed, not even the one who is loved, but the man who governs himself, who does not outsource his emotional survival to the whims of another, who is not one text message away from unraveling, who does not mistake companionship for purpose. That man does not wake up needing to be chosen. He wakes up and chooses. But they never gave you that script. They handed you a mask instead, one labeled nice guy or provider or reliable, depending on what role you were most rewarded for playing. And like a good actor, you put it on. You learned your lines, you smiled when it hurt, you said yes when you wanted to scream, you called it love, even when it cost you your voice. You abandoned your fire for the fantasy of emotional safety, and in the process, you forgot that you were never born to be half of something else. You were born to be whole, forged in solitude, not stitched together by codependence. Seneca would look you in the eye and asked, "Whose life are you living?" And if your answer was framed entirely in terms of another person, what she needs, what she feels, how she views you, he would have said, "Then you are not yet a man, you are a performance of one." Because to the Stoics, masculinity was not about hardness or dominance. It was about governance, of emotion, of action, of thought. And how can you govern yourself if every emotional high and low is dictated by someone else's approval or absence? They conditioned you to think that needing someone is noble, that dependence is romantic, that sacrificing your selfhood is the highest expression of devotion. But Seneca saw through that illusion. He taught that the wise man is content within himself, not because he hates others, but because he refuses to be enslaved by need. To the Stoics, the only real freedom was internal. Every other form, status, sex, affection was fragile, corruptible, and ultimately false. So, if you've been walking through life with that ache in your chest, the one that whispers you're not enough until you're loved, understand this: that ache is not proof of your incompleteness. It is the voice of your unclaimed power. It is the warning that you've been living by a script designed to keep you distracted. Every moment you spend chasing someone to heal you is a moment you delay becoming the man who could heal himself. And until you become that man, no love will ever truly fulfill you, because you'll always be afraid of being left, of not being enough, of being alone. But the man who is at home in his own mind, in his own mission, in his own silence, he doesn't fear being alone. He fears being fake. And that fear keeps him sovereign. Let them mock you for choosing singleness. Let them pity you in whispers. Let them call you selfish or emotionally unavailable or too intense. Because while they are explaining themselves to people who will never understand them, you are building. While they are begging for reassurance, you are sharpening your discipline. While they are measuring love in compromises, you are measuring your life in truth. They'll say you're incomplete, but they are mistaking silence for absence. They are mistaking self-possession for lack. And you don't owe them clarity. You owe yourself command. You are not a half. You are not waiting to be found. You are not unfinished. You are a continent, a sovereign territory, a domain with boundaries, fire, and depth. And until you govern that domain with full authority, you are vulnerable to every storm that whispers promises of love in exchange for your power. But the moment you reclaim that power, something shifts. You become the thing they never expected. The man who doesn't need to be chosen to feel worthy. The man who already chose himself. And that man, he's not just complete, he's dangerous. They will call you cold. They will call you distant. They will say you don't care enough, that you're detached, emotionally unavailable, hard to love. But what they're really saying is that you're not easy to control, that you won't bleed on command, that you no longer hand over your inner world for them to rearrange, and that, to a society that thrives on emotional dependence, is terrifying. Because you've stopped trading your emotions for validation, you've stopped offering your soul in exchange for brief hits of approval, you've stopped shrinking your feelings to fit into someone else's emotional equation. You've learned the rarest form of power there is: emotional sovereignty. The ability to feel fully but be ruled by none of it. To choose your response, not beg for a reaction. To govern your energy, not rent it out in return for affection that comes with conditions. Seneca would not have pitied you for this. He would have applauded you. In a world that mistakes emotional chaos for passion and codependence for intimacy, Seneca stood alone, a pillar of reason in a storm of need. He taught that the wise man does not run from emotion, nor is he consumed by it. He studies it, he respects it, but he does not bow to it, because to be ruled by emotion is to be exiled from reason, and once you've lost reason, you've lost yourself. They want you reactive. They want you questioning your worth because she hasn't texted back. They want you spiraling because her tone changed. They want you addicted to emotional unpredictability, to the highs and lows of being half seen, half loved, half chosen. But emotional dependence is not romance. It's slavery dressed in silk. It's you handing over the key to your peace and begging not to be forgotten. And every time you say, "I just want her to be happy," while ignoring your own erosion, you prove that you've confused loyalty with self-betrayal. Seneca believed that a man should be governed by logos, divine reason, that the ultimate victory was not conquest over others, but over self. that the man who could remain unmoved by insult, unmoved by praise, unmoved by the shifting tides of another's feelings, that man was untouchable. He wrote, "If you wish to be loved, love prudently." And prudence in the Stoic world wasn't timidity, it was wisdom sharpened by fire. It was the refusal to be swept into emotional whirlpools just to prove you're capable of drowning. But they teach you otherwise. They tell you that if you don't chase her validation, you're a bad man. That if you don't crumble at her tears, you're heartless. That if you don't answer every emotional test with an immediate apology, you're cold. But Seneca didn't fear being cold. He feared being enslaved. And emotional slavery, disguised as love, is the most common prison men walk into smiling. You don't call it a cell, you call it connection. But ask yourself this: if you need someone else to feel good about yourself, who really owns your soul? A sovereign man does not collapse when affection is withheld. He does not panic when misunderstood. He does not contort his truth to fit another's comfort zone. His emotions are not weapons, and they are not chains. They are internal signals, not external liabilities. He allows himself to feel, but he never begs, never clings, never bargains with his dignity for a few more drops of attention. That's not strength, that's starvation with a romantic filter. And Seneca would rather you dine alone with your soul intact than feast with your identity gutted. There's a kind of horror that crosses a woman's face when she realizes she can no longer manipulate you with emotions, when she can't bait you into an argument, when you don't panic at her silence, when her withdrawal doesn't make you chase. It's not cruelty, it's control. Not over her, but over yourself. And the moment you master your own emotional reactivity, the game ends, because the game only works if you keep playing. And the sovereign man doesn't play to win, he refuses to play at all. You were raised to confuse reaction with love, to believe that if she cries, you must fold, that if she's upset, you must be wrong, that if there's tension, it must be your job to fix it. And so you've lived in a cycle of emotional debt, one where every silence is a threat, every question is a trap, every conversation is a performance. But Seneca knew that real strength begins when you stop being emotionally available to chaos, when you no longer allow others to rent space in your psyche without your consent, when you finally understand that peace is not a luxury, it's your responsibility. You see, restraint is not repression. That's the lie they tell to keep you soft, to make you think that every unspoken word is a missed opportunity, that every boundary is a cruelty. But restraint is sacred. It's the art of knowing when your silence has more weight than 1,000 arguments. It's the wisdom to choose stillness over reaction, clarity over chaos, solitude over simulated closeness. Because most relationships today are not built on truth, they're built on mutual fear of being alone, of being wrong, of being unchosen. But the single man who has cultivated emotional sovereignty is free from that fear. He doesn't posture, he doesn't perform, he doesn't fear being misunderstood, because he understands himself, and that understanding cannot be bartered or diluted for approval. When you reach that point, something changes in your presence. You walk into rooms with your energy intact. You respond slowly, if at all. You don't flinch when people throw emotional bait. You see the hook and you let it pass. You are not avoiding emotion, you are choosing which ones are worth carrying. Seneca taught that even kings are slaves if they are ruled by their feelings, but a common man, ruled by reason, is freer than emperors. So ask yourself, what are you ruled by? Is it her moods, her texts, her shifting expectations? Or is it your own inner compass, forged in silence and strengthened through solitude? Most men today don't lack love, they lack clarity. They don't lack affection, they lack allegiance to themselves. And this is the paradox. When you no longer need emotional validation, you become infinitely more powerful in all your connections. Because now, your love is not a currency, it's a gift. Freely given, never demanded. You don't love out of scarcity, but out of strength. You don't stay to be chosen, You stay because it aligns with your mission, and when it doesn't, you walk. Not in anger, in integrity. So yes, let them say you're emotionally unavailable. Let them say you're hard to read, too grounded, too calm. Because what they're really saying is this: you can't be played. And in a world that thrives on emotional theater, that is the rarest currency a man can possess: emotional sovereignty. It doesn't just make you free, it makes you formidable. Time. The one resource no man can earn back. The one currency every heartbeat spends. You think you're poor because you lack love? Look again. The man who is single, awake and focused is wealthier than kings because he owns something they lost long ago: undivided attention. In a world devoured by distraction, plagued by dopamine addictions and emotional bandwidth theft, the man who is single and sovereign stands like a monolith, not because he is untouched by desire, but because he no longer mortgages his minutes for validation. While others donate their lives to fleeting connections, he is building something eternal with the silence they're too afraid to face. You don't realize how much of your energy is bleeding out until you're alone long enough to feel the difference. In a relationship, it happens slowly. First a compromise, then a concession, then a calendar that isn't yours anymore. Suddenly, your mornings are no longer yours. Your nights, negotiated. Your weekends, pre-approved. You call it love. Seneca would call it theft. Because what is stolen doesn't always vanish, it's repurposed. Every argument over nothing costs focus. Every silent treatment drains cognitive power. Every hour explaining yourself, adjusting yourself, rehearsing a softer version of the truth, it all adds up. And what it adds up to is subtraction, the quiet erosion of the one thing you can never reclaim: your directed energy. Seneca didn't measure wealth in coins, he measured it in clarity, in command. He wrote, "Life is long if you know how to use it, but most men don't. Most men use it the way attics use time, scrambling, performing, compensating. They spend their best hours putting out emotional fires they didn't start and compromising missions they never fully defined. They confuse activity for progress and attention for affection. But the man who is single, the man who has withdrawn from the circus of emotional transaction, he knows the truth. Time, when unshared with chaos, becomes a weapon. It cuts through delusion. It carves new possibilities. It sharpens discipline to an obsidian edge. There's a silence you only find in solitude, a sacred stillness where your mind, no longer reacting to someone else's moods or expectations, begins to speak in deeper frequencies. At first, it can be terrifying. You'll feel the ghost of past dependencies rising to fill the void. You'll hear the voice of doubt whispering that you're wasting your time, that no one's waiting for you, that you're falling behind. But those voices are just echoes, residue from a life lived on someone else's rhythm. Stay in that silence long enough, and something miraculous happens. You begin to hear your own voice again, not the one shaped by compromise or filtered through fear, the raw one, the honest one, the one that knows exactly what you are meant to do. Most men don't hear that voice until it's too late. They wake up at 40 with a resume of regrets, a body softened by neglect, a mind fractured by years of emotional multitasking. They spent their youth reacting instead of building, explaining instead of executing, chasing peace in the eyes of someone who never knew how to hold it. But the single man? He hoards his hours like treasure. He wakes with a plan, not an apology. He moves through the day with an internal compass, not someone else's mood ring. And at night, his rest is earned, not negotiated through emotional exhaustion. Seneca saw it clearly. He warned that busyness is often a form of avoidance, that many people fill their lives with noise not because they love motion, but because they fear meaning, real meaning, the kind that emerges when you're no longer distracted by who loves you, who texts back, who understands you. In that radical silence, truth emerges, And truth, for the Stoic, was the only worthy pursuit, he said. Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. He never said spend your life pacifying someone who fears your intensity. He never said dilute your fire to warm someone else's comfort zone. Think of how many dreams were postponed in the name of love, how many workouts skipped because she was upset, how many ideas shelved because they didn't fit the life you were building together, how many books unread, skills unpracticed, risks avoided, all because your energy was scattered, not stolen in one grand gesture, but eroded over time like a mountain worn down by soft rain. That's the tax of distraction. It doesn't come with a warning, it comes with a smile, a sigh, 1,000 little compromises that you call partnership, until one day you wake up and wonder where your purpose went. But the single man, especially the one who embraces his solitude, is taxed by nothing but his own ambition. He doesn't wait for permission to pursue his edge. He doesn't consult someone else's comfort level before choosing to grow. He reads when others binge. He trains while others whine. He builds while others beg for emotional resolution to arguments that should have never begun. His calendar is his creed, his habits his allies, his time a sacred altar on which he sacrifices everything that does not serve his evolution. And yet they'll look at him with pity. They'll say he's missing out, that no one to come home to means no joy, no fulfillment, no real life. But Seneca would ask, what kind of life is it when your joy is dependent on someone else's stability, when your fire is rationed because your full power makes her insecure? When the very things that make you extraordinary must be hidden just to preserve harmony. That's not peace, that's performance. The single man doesn't perform. He produces, he executes, he refines. Stillness is not stagnation, it's preparation. It's where the great plans are drawn, the internal compass recalibrated, the body brought back into alignment with purpose. In a world that equates busyness with worth, stillness is the rebellion. And the man who can sit with himself, who can fill a Saturday with nothing but his own mission and meaning, that man is not lonely. He is lethal. Because he sees what others don't. He sees how much of modern life is built on distraction, on men too scattered to rise, too tired to fight, too emotionally depleted to create. He sees it, and he steps away. So the next time someone asks why you're still single, don't just smile. Know what they're really asking. They're asking how you've managed to keep your time uncolonized, how you've stayed untethered from the emotional machinery that grinds most men into dust. They want to know the secret, not to your loneliness, but to your clarity, your power, your relentless presence. And you'll know it has nothing to do with luck. It has everything to do with your refusal to trade your attention for affection, your purpose for proximity, your fire for fleeting praise. Seneca's radical economy wasn't about poverty of experience, it was about wealth of focus. He believed that a man who could spend his hours with intention was richer than any emperor surrounded by noise. And that's what singleness offers. Not lack, but luxury. Not loneliness, but liberation. The freedom to spend your energy where it matters most, on becoming. And in that economy, the single man wins, not just because he has more time, but because he knows exactly how to spend it. They want you to be afraid of silence. That's the trick. To keep you moving, chasing, explaining, anything but still. Because when a man sits still long enough, he begins to see. He sees the masks he's worn. He sees the compromises that stole his voice. He sees the shallow rituals he called romance. And in that silence, something ancient stirs, the ghost of who he could have been, had he not been taught to fear his own company. That's why they label solitude as loneliness, because if you ever embraced it, if you ever chose to walk into it fully awake, you'd become something terrifying, a man who no longer needs the world to tell him who he is. Seneca didn't fear solitude, he revered it. He wrote, Retire into yourself as much as you can. Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. Notice the absence of one word, lover. He didn't say go find someone to fill your evenings or heal your wounds. He said go inward. That the soul, if cultivated, was the most powerful ally a man could ever possess, because the man who has mastered his solitude is untouchable, not because he doesn't feel, but because he feels fully without fleeing from it. There's a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is hunger with no food in sight. Solitude is fasting by choice, sharp, deliberate, cleansing. Loneliness says, please come save me. Solitude says, I will save myself. And the man who chooses solitude, who walks willingly into the furnace of his own thoughts, that man is not a victim. He is a warrior, a philosopher, a force being shaped in private while the rest of the world performs for approval. But they'll try to convince you otherwise. They'll tell you that if you're single, you're unloved. If you're alone, you're undesirable. That your worth is measured by how many people need you, chase you, claim you. But what they fear, truly fear, is the man who doesn't flinch in isolation, the man who walks through a quiet apartment and hears not emptiness, but invitation. An invitation to master his mind, to hone his body, to clarify his purpose. They fear him because he doesn't beg, he doesn't audition, he doesn't rush to fill the silence with noise, he lets it expand, he lets it teach. Seneca understood the necessity of that inner retreat. In a Rome filled with opulence, distraction, and performative virtue, he chose depth, he chose rigor, he chose stillness. Because he knew that without that inward retreat, a man is just a puppet, a performer in someone else's drama. But the single man who embraces solitude builds something few understand, a fortress, not to keep others out, but to protect his clarity, his time, his essence. You build that fortress every time you choose your own rhythm over someone else's approval, every time you say no to a shallow connection, to an emotional distraction, to a temptation disguised as love. You build it with every disciplined morning, with every journal entry that clarifies your war, with every book that sharpens your vision. You build it when you train instead of text, when you study instead of scroll, when you walk in silence instead of talking just to be heard. And once built, that fortress becomes more than just a boundary. It becomes your kingdom, a place where your energy is sovereign, where your standards are law, where your future is crafted brick by deliberate brick. Most men never build this place. They live as tenants in relationships they didn't fully choose. They become caretakers of someone else's emotional landscape, guards at the gate of someone else's peace, and in doing so, they abandon their own territory. They let weeds grow where there should have been walls. They let silence rot when it could have been sacred. The single man does not make that mistake, not because he is afraid of love, but because he is in love, with becoming, with potential, with the man he is sculpting in solitude. He knows that the world doesn't reward that kind of man with applause. It rewards him with suspicion, because he can't be bribed. He can't be lured by softness or tamed by guilt. He doesn't need a partner to feel whole. He needs a mission, a horizon, a mountain to climb that doesn't demand he leave his integrity at the base. So when you sit alone on a Friday night and the voices creep in, the ones that whisper you should be out, that you're wasting your youth, that no one is coming to save you, pause. Let the silence respond. Let it remind you that you are not waiting, you are not withering, you are becoming. That this solitude is not punishment, it's preparation. And those who laugh at you now, who pity your so-called loneliness, will one day come to you asking how you did it, how you stayed steady while they chased storms, how you built an empire inside your own skin while they begged for emotional scraps. Seneca knew that the man who fears being alone is already in chains, not physical ones, but chains of dependence, chains of fear, chains of unchosen compromise. And he knew that real freedom, the kind that rattles the bones of an empire, could only be found in solitude, because it's there, and only there, that you see yourself clearly, not through the eyes of a lover, not filtered through the needs of others, but in raw, unfiltered truth. That truth may scare you at first, it may burn, it may show you all the ways you've diluted your fire to stay warm next to someone who feared your heat. It may reveal how many of your choices were really just performances. But stay with it. Let the silence speak. Let the solitude sharpen. Because on the other side of that storm is a man the world doesn't know how to handle. A man who walks with purpose, not permission. A man who carries his own peace into every room. A man who no longer chases affection because he's building something far rarer. Presence. Presence is what they feel when you enter. Not your noise, not your need, but your centeredness, your unshakable self. That's the gift of solitude. It doesn't just make you strong, it makes you undeniable. And while others spend their days managing emotional volatility, the single man, the solitary warrior, refines his soul until it becomes a weapon, not to harm, but to protect, to carve, to build. So let them fear your silence. Let them call you mysterious, distant, intense, because they're right, you are, but not because you're broken, because you're building. Because you've found what Seneca found, that the soul, when cultivated alone, becomes a temple, and the man who lives there walks with the gods. She walks into your life like a promise, a smile that feels like salvation, a glance that makes the chaos stop. You think, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for, the validation, the arrival, the answer to the ache you didn't know how to name. She chooses you, and for a moment it feels like you finally exist. And that's the first warning. When being chosen feels like becoming real, it means you've forgotten who you are, without the echo of someone else's affection. Seneca warned against this. He saw it long before Tinder, long before curated profiles and algorithmic soulmates. He knew that a man who needs to be chosen to feel whole is already lost, not in romance, but in himself. If you wish to be loved, he wrote, love prudently, not passionately, not recklessly, prudently, with discernment, with sovereignty. Because what most men call love is not love. It's a performance born of starvation, a desperate bargain made with someone who promises to fill the void you should have sealed yourself. You confuse attention with truth. You confuse her choosing you with her seeing you, but she doesn't see your solitude, your sacrifice, the nights you stayed up breaking the generational curses no one claps for. She doesn't see the war you wage every morning just to stay disciplined, focused, alive. She sees the mask you wear to be palatable, the softness you manufacture to keep her calm, and you think that's intimacy. You call it love, but Seneca would call it self-abandonment. Because love that demands your silence is not love, it's submission. You start to make deals with yourself. You call compromise what is really corrosion. You tell yourself that adjusting is normal, that real men bend. But when every adjustment takes you further from your edge, from your truth, from the mission you were forging in fire, what's left? Who is she choosing really? Not the real you, the edited version, the safe one, the agreeable one, the one who says, it's okay, when it's not, who says, I understand, when he's never felt more confused. You become a mirage of your own masculinity, visible, attractive, but not real. And that's the great lie, that to be loved, you must first become lovable by someone else's standards. So you shapeshift, you mute your needs, you rearrange your boundaries, you pretend that your fire doesn't scare you anymore, you dull your edge. And she praises you for it, they all do, because you've become easy, comfortable, predictable. The wildness in you, the thing that made you magnetic, now buried under layers of people-pleasing. And the worst part? You think this is what love requires. Seneca saw this sickness for what it is, a man outsourcing his worth to someone else's perception, a man trading his mission for a moment of closeness. He who is brave is free, he said, but you, craving comfort, have become domesticated. Brave men walk alone if they must. Needy men stay in rooms that shrink their spirit just to avoid the echo of solitude. You've mistaken the high of being seen for the reality of being understood. But being seen doesn't mean you're known. It means you're visible. And visibility without truth is theater. Most men don't fall in love. They fall into dependency, into performance, into contracts they never sign but keep fulfilling out of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of facing the quiet question that solitude always demands. Who are you when no one's watching? And so they stay, not because it's love, but because it's familiar, because she's there, because leaving would mean admitting that you were never truly yourself in the first place. And yet every time she says, "I love you," something inside you doesn't believe it, not because she's lying, but because deep down you know she doesn't know you. She knows the man you became for her, the one who stopped dreaming too loud, who cut off friendships that made her insecure, who downplayed his ambition to make her feel safe. You buried your chaos, your drive, your intensity. You thought love meant control, that becoming manageable made you worthy. But Seneca would have scoffed at such a trade. He believed in the primacy of self-command, that no external affection is worth the price of internal confusion, that a man who loses his clarity to preserve a relationship has not gained love, he's lost his way. He warned that the mind grows restless in captivity, and relationships, when not chosen with wisdom, become emotional prisons. You call it commitment, but if you can't speak freely, think freely, move freely, what are you really committed to? They'll tell you that love is about giving, but they won't tell you that some forms of giving are just slow suicide, that not all sacrifices are noble, some are just unseen. And you think your pain is proof of love, that the more you endure, the more loyal you are. But endurance without growth is just decay, and Seneca would have called you out. He'd say, "You are not brave for staying, you are afraid of leaving, and that fear, not love, is what's shaping your life." The woman-shaped mirage is this: she seems to offer completion, clarity, identity. But when you look closer, what she offers is permission to feel valuable. As long as you stay in character, as long as your truth doesn't disrupt the dynamic, as long as your growth doesn't surpass her comfort zone. But you were not born to perform. You were born to build, to forge, to speak like a man unafraid of echoes, to move like your soul is not up for negotiation. And here's the most painful truth. The longer you stay in a love that demands your silence, the harder it is to remember the sound of your own voice. The longer you stay in a dynamic that rewards your compliance, the less you believe you're worthy of command. Until one day, you don't even flinch when she praises the watered-down version of you. You smile, you thank her, and you call that harmony. But harmony bought with self-erasure is not peace, the paralysis. Seneca believed that real connection can only exist between equals, between whole beings, between people who do not need each other to survive, but choose each other to grow. Anything else is theater, a beautiful prison, a gilded cage you decorate with cute captions and filtered photos, but deep inside, you know, this is not it. This was never it. This is safety disguised as intimacy, control disguised as care, need disguised as destiny. So when the mirage begins to fade, and it always does, you'll be left with a choice: rebuild the fantasy or reclaim yourself. One path leads to more of the same, more pretending, more negotiation, more slow-burning betrayal of your truth. The other leads into the fire of solitude, into silence, into becoming. It won't feel romantic, it will feel raw, brutal, but it will also feel real. And that's the thing they never told you. Real doesn't always feel good, but it feels right. And Seneca, with all his Roman steel and Stoic wisdom, would have nodded at that, because the man who chooses himself, not from bitterness, but from clarity, that man doesn't walk away from love. He walks toward something deeper, toward alignment, toward truth, toward a life where being chosen is no longer the prize, because he already chose himself. And when a man does that, when he tears down the mirage and builds from raw stone, he becomes something dangerous. Not because he's cold, but because he's clear. Not because he doesn't feel, but because he refuses to be ruled. And in that clarity, in that sovereignty, he doesn't find the absence of love. He finds the space to love rightly, fiercely, fully, without losing himself in the process. They told you to find someone and settle down, to calm your fire, to exchange your wild vision for something manageable, predictable. They never said it that plainly, but every story, every movie, every family dinner prayer whispered it. Partnership is the prize, love is the mission, and if you're still alone, something must be missing. But what if they were wrong? What if the truth is this? Some men aren't built to settle. They're built to create. And the moment you confuse mission with maintenance, you lose the thread that was pulling you toward your highest self. There's something that happens to a man when he walks through the world unanchored to emotional obligation. He starts to see differently. Time bends differently. Every morning is no longer a continuation of yesterday's argument or a prelude to today's explanation. It is a blank scroll, sacred, untouched, ready for fire, for ink, for blood. The single man, if awake, walks into each day not asking how he should serve someone else's emotional weather, but how he should attack his own vision. He is not answering to guilt or performance. He is answering to the divine roar that's been caged inside him since birth. Seneca said, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." That's not a casual reminder, that's a commandment. And the single man, free from the constant psychological bargaining of the modern relationship, obeys it. He studies, he sculpts, he builds systems, he refines habits. His life becomes not a shared lease, not a space negotiated for mutual comfort, but a temple, a fierce, holy domain crafted by intent. He chooses the walls, the rituals, the music, the silence. He does not decorate for consensus, he consecrates for power. And here's the raw truth. Most men never get there. They spend their prime energy consumed in emotional logistics, text frequency, tone misinterpretation, apology marathons, validation loops. They pour themselves into maintenance, into making it work, into keeping her calm, proving their worth, walking the tightrope between emotional availability and self-preservation. But the man who walks alone, the one who's chosen solitude not as a wound but as a weapon, he doesn't maintain, he creates. And what he creates outlasts the fleeting chemistry of infatuation. It becomes legacy. The world calls him selfish, detached, elusive. That's the price of creating. They say he's not emotionally available. What they mean is he's not distractible, not moldable, not looking for someone to give his life meaning because he's too busy giving his life direction. While others build comfort, he builds momentum. While others fear the silence, he chases clarity. And while others fear the silence of solitude, he uses it as his forge. As a violent kind of peace that descends when you stop seeking permission to matter. When you no longer need someone to reflect back your worth in kisses or cohabitation, you become ruthless, not cruel, but precise. You cut away what's unaligned. You no longer entertain the slow erosion of your mission in the name of compromise. You no longer mistake agreement for support. And you damn sure don't ask someone else to hold the blueprint to your legacy. Seneca wouldn't have told you to find a partner before you found your purpose. He wouldn't have told you that love is the answer to your restlessness. He would have told you to get still, to get disciplined, to build a life so grounded in principle that anyone who enters it either rises to match its architecture or is naturally repelled. That's not arrogance, that's filtration. That's knowing that a man whose life is built on creation doesn't need emotional Novocaine to feel alive. His work gives him that, his clarity gives him that, his undivided presence gives him that. You've been told that your worth is how well you care for others, that your masculinity is proven through sacrifice. But what if the sacrifice they praise is actually your execution? What if being a good man has become code for being emotionally tamed? What if the real good man, the man who refuses to dilute his intensity, who builds, protects, refines, has been exiled from the modern love equation because he's too dangerous, too focused, too sovereign? You know why they mock the single man who's on a mission? Because he's uninterested in their distractions, because they can't sell him temporary affection, because he doesn't flinch when they pull back their approval. That kind of man threatens everything, because he exposes what they lack: direction, drive, dominance over self, and the man who owns himself is ungovernable. He may live alone, but his presence is never small. He walks into rooms with a kind of gravity that can't be faked. You know it when you see it, the man whose discipline is not for show, who doesn't chase, who doesn't explain, who doesn't adjust his energy to keep someone else emotionally upright. That man isn't avoiding intimacy, he's protecting his blueprint. Because once you've tasted the fruits of focused solitude, deep work, uninterrupted vision, unshakable mornings, you don't go back. You don't beg for companionship that costs you your crown. And yet he isn't cold. He isn't unreachable. He just won't build shrines to shallow connection. He won't bow to the illusion that being loved is the highest human achievement. Because he's seen what most men never do, that creation is presence. That the act of building, body, mind, mission, is proof you are alive. The single man doesn't wait to be loved. He leaves fingerprints on history. Seneca wrote, "Most men complain of the meanness of nature because we are born for so short a space of time. But the real issue is not life's brevity, it is the squander. That's the cost of a misaligned relationship. Not just emotional fatigue, squander, of days, of decades, of destiny." And the single man refuses to pay that cost, not because he's afraid of intimacy, but because he reveres his time, because he knows that every moment spent off purpose is a theft, and the thief is often wearing the smile of someone who says they love you. So he chooses the mountain over the mattress, the silence over the small talk, the solitude over the performance, and in doing so he becomes what the world quietly aches for but rarely recognizes: a man who is both whole and holy in his solitude, a man who does not require affection to access his fire, who does not require validation to move with weight, who does not seek to be saved, because he's too busy saving what matters most, his mission. And one day, if love arrives, if partnership aligns, it will not find a man looking for completion. It will find a man already at work, already full, already walking a path no heartache could derail. And she will either join in that fire or disappear in its heat, because he will not stop building, he will not stop forging. He will not trade the temple for the illusion of a happy home built on self-neglect. That is why the single man wins, not because he has no one, but because he has himself, because he has reclaimed his life from the claws of distraction and shaped it into something sacred, and from that place of solitude, of sovereignty, of unapologetic creation, he becomes unstoppable, not in noise, but in purpose, not in appearance, but in presence. Seneca knew, your life is not something to rent, it is your temple. Build it like you're not expecting anyone else to save it. Build it like your soul depends on it, because it does. He walks past you and you feel it, not arrogance, not aggression, just gravity, a quiet weight to his presence, no ring, no entourage, no need to perform. You think he's cold, or maybe broken, but you're wrong. What you're feeling is power, not the kind that shouts or flexes, the kind that radiates from someone who no longer needs anything to feel whole. That's the dangerous man, and he walks alone, not because no one wants him, but because he finally stopped needing to be wanted. Seneca would have recognized this man. He would have seen in him not a bachelor, not a rebel, but a philosopher warrior, someone who has transcended the societal hunger for external validation and replaced it with self-governance, No man is free, he said, who is a slave to his body. And what is need if not the tyranny of the body, the compulsion to be seen, touched, praised, wanted? When a man still needs, he is still a hostage, but when he no longer seeks love to feel alive, he becomes dangerous, not to others, to the system, because he can't be bribed. The awakened single man doesn't need reassurance, because he has met his own silence, he has tasted his own discipline, he has looked in the mirror, found the parts of himself that once begged for female attention and said no more. He has buried the boy who waited for love to make him a man. He has stopped performing for approval, and in doing so, he has become unpredictable. Not because he's unstable, but because his motivations are now internal. You can't guilt him, you can't seduce him with the promise of comfort. He walks his own road and doesn't ask for permission. They don't pity him, no matter how loudly they pretend to. They fear him, because deep down, they know what he knows, that most men are not men. They are performances, scripts, malleable caricatures shaped by the fear of being unloved. They play roles, boyfriend, husband, provider, and with each role a little more of their truth dies. But the man who walks alone, he has burned the script. He has chosen the brutal clarity of solitude over the soft decay of compromise. That choice makes him rare, and anything rare in a world built on conformity is called dangerous. You know why they mock the man who doesn't chase, why they call him cold, unavailable, emotionally stunted. It's not because he lacks depth. It's because he's no longer predictable, because he can't be managed through praise or punished through withdrawal. His self-worth isn't hanging on anyone's response. That kind of man is terrifying to a culture built on psychological negotiation. He is not waiting for someone to see his value. He has already assigned it. He is not waiting to be picked. He has already picked himself. Seneca wrote, "He is most powerful who has himself in his own power, not who commands others, not who accumulates accolades, but who possesses himself so completely that he cannot be shaken by circumstance or seduction. That is why the single man, when awake, is not a phase. He is a force. He is not waiting for life to begin with a partner. He is already in motion. Every day, every decision, a reflection of inner mastery. He builds not because someone believes in him, but because he believes in himself. He trains not to impress, but to sharpen. He creates not to be seen, but to exist. And when he is misunderstood, he does not explain. When he is doubted, he does not defend, because a man with self-command does not barter his energy for understanding. He knows that most will never get it. That's the cost of walking alone, but it's also the reward, because he's no longer tempted by the crowd, by consensus, by the shallow praise that evaporates when he stops performing. He does not crave belonging. He creates a world where he belongs by default, where his solitude is not emptiness, but echo, not isolation, but sanctuary. The most dangerous thing about him isn't his independence, it's his discipline, his ability to sit with himself and not flinch, to face the abyss of his own unresolved questions and still breathe deeply, to walk into every day without needing applause or touch or reassurance. That's not just stoicism, that's spiritual sovereignty. That's what Seneca meant when he said, "The greatest empire is to be emperor of yourself," because empires built on the approval of others will always crumble. But a man who owns his own soul, he is unshakable. That's the man they don't see in movies, the man who didn't compromise his mission for a fairy tale, the man who didn't apologize for his standards, who didn't bend to avoid being labeled too intense, too focused, too hard. That man didn't lower his fire, he just walked alone until someone matched it. And if no one did, he still built, he still rose, he still reigned. And here's what they never tell you, that man is more loved than he ever imagined, not by many, but by the few who are drawn to truth. Because when a man is whole, when he no longer bleeds need or performs submission, the people who find him are real. They aren't drawn to what he offers them, they are drawn to what he's become. And that kind of love, rooted in respect, not rescue, is the only love worth having, but you only find it by becoming dangerous first, by letting go of the fantasy that you must be needed to be valuable, by choosing to walk through fire alone. They will say you are too hard to love, that you are too intense, that you expect too much, but what they really mean is, you won't shrink, you won't soften, you won't compromise your clarity for comfort. That scares them, because you remind them of what they gave up, their edge, their truth, their wildness. You are a living confrontation of their mediocrity, and so they'll mock you, call you lonely till you broken. But you'll smile, not with smugness, but with serenity, because you've learned what Seneca taught, that the man who governs himself governs fate. He doesn't wait for fate to be kind. He doesn't wait for luck to strike. He sharpens, he prepares, he moves with intention. That's why he's feared, because he cannot be predicted, and a man who cannot be predicted cannot be controlled. That is his true danger, not in what he does to others, but in what he refuses to do, abandon himself. So let them talk, let them pity you in whispers, let them think you are missing out. They do not see the fire you wake with, the discipline you live with, the legacy you build in silence. They do not see the nights you've walked alone through doubt and still chosen progress. They do not see the temple you've made of your life, but you see it, you feel it, and when you lay your head down at night, there is no question of who you are. There is no negotiation, no confusion, only power, only peace. You are not dangerous because you walk alone. You are dangerous because you chose to, and in that choice you reclaimed what most men lose the moment they seek to be loved, before they've learned to lead themselves. Let that sink in. You do not owe the world your vulnerability until you've mastered your sovereignty. And when you do, when you've built your life like a kingdom, ruled not by emotion but by clarity, then and only then will you see what Seneca knew all along, that a man who walks alone doesn't walk empty. He walks with fate, he walks with fire, and above all, he walks free.